Maybe it's the steaming bowls of mashed potatoes and thick brown gravy. Maybe it's the tasty, tender chicken, fried up golden brown. Whatever it is, Sunday dinner is it. The best meal of the week.
We start with good, fresh chicken, like we know we should.
11 herbs and spices make it fit.
Gobble, gobble, motherfucker.
Something strange is happening to Shay and her dog Kitty.
My friends, I think you're terribly sick, which is why you're beautiful. You know, I've always wondered what it's like when you're holding an axe. Does your imagination tend to wander? Swimming with these horrid thoughts of just wanting to let those thoughts run off and start swinging the axe away? Lopping off as many heads as you can? Don't you ever wonder if there's pain when having your head chopped off? Excruciating discomfort when your brain is being severed from the body? Your life quickly fading away because of no blood going into that head, no more fuel for that perverted dark mind. Now, even though history has shown that the decapitated head can show something of a response after the head has been separated, for me, I wonder how long the body will last without its head, if it can run and dance to a full song. Of course, we can't go around in today's world chopping off heads to find out, even though I can tell that many of us are tempted to find out, especially on certain individuals. No, I think that would be frowned upon in today's society, when you start turning your sick fantasy into a morbid hobby. But what about those who like to indulge that sick fantasy in a way that's shamefully legal and controversial? You know, the ones who enjoy the sadistic thrill upon animals that are destined to be executed rather than dying off naturally. That behind this image of survival or running a chicken farm is a sadist who enjoys seizing the opportunity and indulging that perverted need for sadistic cruelty upon a living creature, just yearning to graduate on bigger prey. Today's story, my friends, takes us to a place where I've once called home, Kentucky. Story should already be terrifying. Here we have Eben Selissa, farmer and co-owner of a chicken farm that's probably a few months away from seeing itself sink, a retired colonel of the United States Marine Corps, highly decorated Vietnam vet, and a man who loves a good kill. For Eben, you could say it's a sport, a rite of passage for manhood, that small moment of sadistic joy when choosing which one of these stupid chickens gets to be sacrificed. The connection between executioner and the one bird that's being chosen for death. For Eben, it's an art when chopping the chicken's head off with one clean swipe. And the entertainment in seeing how long the headless body can go running around before falling over. 42 seconds. A breaking record for Eben. Now, if you think Eben's love for executing chickens is the primary cause of his failing business, well, my friends, I would say you're right. Even though Eben promised his nagging wife Martha that he was done with the killing after nearly losing the business because of all the chickens he killed on a daily basis, and agreed with his wife's idea of running the chicken farm by selling eggs, well, Eben would say anything when being pissed drunk and trying to shut the woman up. Damn woman doesn't know what she's talking about. Ever since she lost the baby and can't have any more, she's been obsessed with this idea over eggs. Obviously, the woman needs to see a head doctor or something for that mother fixation. Or it can be like Eben, do a little therapy with an axe. Lord knows how many times Martha's been on his mind when seeing those headless chickens run around. Of course, maybe Martha may be onto something here. But no, I don't think Eben wants any part of Martha's idea of running the chicken farm by selling eggs and wiping the chicken blood and gizzard bits on her blouse. Nope, it's chicken killing business for Eben. This time we make sure to save a few eggs, which will make more chickens. A much better idea than Martha's own way of running things around here. So a little backstory over this lovely household and the Celisa poultry business. You see, Martha was 14 years old when she was with Eben. Something about a man in uniform that drove her madly in love over Eben. He was handsome, a nice body, and a dominating personality. But Eben wasn't much of the gentle and caring type when it was needed. More on the rough and wild side. A little too rough on certain occasions when getting slapped around on them drunken nights. So after the marriage and Eben's retirement from the military, Eben ended up inheriting the farm after his father's death and continue on with the family business of running the Celisa chicken farm. And for a while, the poultry business had seen its success. It was supposed to be a lovely nest to raise a family after Martha got pregnant with their first child. Until Martha had a miscarriage and was unable to have any more children. After that, the chicken farm began to see its problems. They were losing chickens, all because of Eben killing more than the necessary amount. Now, even though it was Martha who managed to save themselves from losing the business, now maybe it was because of the child she lost or not, Martha didn't like the idea of running a business and killing chickens, nor her husband's fascination when it comes to chopping off their heads. It was sickening to watch him find sadistic entertainment on the cruel death of a defenseless animal. Every time she would hear the axe hit the wooden stump outside, how Martha grew more resentment towards her husband, the regret and hatred becoming heavier. Even after nearly losing the business, it was not enough to hinder Eben's sadistic needs, which is why Martha had been orchestrating a scheme to sabotage Eben's ways of running the chicken farm. You see, for quite some time, Martha had been in contact with a local physician who could provide a special hormone serum that can spoil the taste of chicken, but make bigger and healthier eggs. For a price, of course. So after mustering up enough funds for the serum, and Martha's scheme being nearly ruined when her husband walked in on her mixing the serum, drunk and furious, slapping her around for her backstabbing ways, there was still enough serum left to proceed with their plans, and see one of Eben's chickens lay a prized egg. So here we have a husband who gets a little too carried away with his therapy moments of playing God, and the wife who wants to sabotage her husband's ways by playing God herself. Oh, my friends, how many beautiful horror stories were created when an idiot decides to play God. But seeing how we humans never learn from our past mistakes, are too much of a coward to accept the horrors we've created. That's why I'm convinced that people playing God is a horror that will never get old. That night, after that certain chicken was injected with an experimental hormone, something happened that night. The birth of something that was created by the hands of man. These pale greenish-looking eggs was not an act of God, but the act of man, created out of hatred and anger. And as all the eggs, with the exception of one, disintegrated into a putrid slime, something beautiful hatched that night. The following morning, Martha was repulsed by the results of her scheme. The scent of rot and death that lingered in the air. That damn husband of hers won again with his ways. But what Martha did not know is that her scheme did come with results. Completely unaware of a new breed was watching her, studying her, having a full understanding of this world and its sickening ways. This thing, created by the hands of man, immediately took hatred upon its own existence, and the hatred it had for this world was indescribable. And for a while, on the surface, the farm maintained its normal routine, but unknown to the Celisa family, a shape was taking form, watching the passion, the death, the sadistic joy, and the inner hatred on this farm. And after seeing enough gore, enough drama and killing to last a lifetime of traumatic horror, this creation had taken a vow a very personal vow for its existence. Since the day when Eben caught Martha trying to sabotage the chickens with that hormone serum, whatever connection these two had was now gone. Eben's appetite for execution having an increase when thinking about his wife, and Martha's inner resentment evolving into a murderous rage when seeing her husband maintaining his bloody ways. The chickens were being killed. At this rate, they may not be able to save the business. And you know what? Eben could care less. It's not like he needs that useless woman to run the farm. God, how much he despised her. The thoughts of seeing her head on that chopping block becoming more and more tempting. Somewhere around here is the chicken of his dreams. Eben saw it going into the barn. Smart chicken. It knows death is coming. Just brings more entertainment for one of Eben's grisly rituals. You know, with that nagging bitch trying to run things around here with that egg business, trying to interfere his ways in running the farm with that half-assed scheme of hers, might not be a bad idea to see his inner fantasy becoming a reality. Bet she'll break the record of dancing and running around longer than 42 seconds. But first things first, Eben's got to take care of this chicken before getting down to business. So Eben busy with one of them grisly rituals of his, before turning the axe on his wife. It seems like Martha has her own plans of getting them hands bloodied. Fed up on being pushed aside by her useless husband, all them years she wasted away. With a kitchen knife, and the attempts to butter up her husband as a devoted wife who has changed her ways. In fact, a wife who's willing to join her husband in killing all the chickens. Seems like Martha's scheme had hit a dilemma when overhearing the commotion within the barn shed. Sounded like something was running around, banging itself up against the walls. If I'm not mistaken, sounds like the answer to my grim curiosity. How long can the body dance and run after its head been chopped off? When Martha opened the doors to the barn shed, she didn't expect that her attempt to kill Eben would result with her husband dancing and hopping around headless. An evil trying to break Eben's record of 42 seconds and seeing Eben's body slowing down, losing its twitch and hops like a stumbling drunk. Well, with this evil overhearing Martha's promises of killing all the chickens, hopefully Martha would be the lucky one to break the record. And guess what, my friends? Even though Eben's body was 40 seconds long before falling over outside the barn, Martha danced, wriggled, and waved like a drunken ballerina for 1 minute and 13 seconds. A new record, but with preservation, determination, and 641 people in this county now having a full understanding of humanity and its shameful ways. This evil was far from being done in playing the game. Here's another hair-raising tale of terror for you to indulge in. Just couldn't get enough horror with that yarn of terror about a young man's unique methods of keeping his bloodline going. Or just maybe looking to enjoy an appetizer of horror before feasting on the main course. Careful, my friends. You just might choke on this one. Anyways, I bet you didn't know that your beloved narrator, your host of the most vile and sadistic stories on YouTube, has a job. Oh yes, had to go through a lot of climbing to land myself within a career where I get to play with creepy crawlies that haunt you at night while I read you a bedtime story. And some of you thought that the Sandman would leave you to your nightmares without having a few visitors hiding under your sheets at night. But for some people, they don't really enjoy that climb. Sometimes there are people who prefer making their way to the top of the ladder by getting his or her hands dirty, doing a little backstabbing here and there, like your average YouTuber. Introduction: Ernie Matson, a man who's got it made, and isn't shy from reaping the spoils of his hard work and success as a new manager of the Hudson Soap Factory. Ever since the former manager, Bernie Anderson, had mysteriously disappeared. And with this evening bringing wine and women for Ernie, obviously one of those special nights for those who are swimming with success. But for a man like Ernie, Obviously, he's got to look his best. Which is why he's got to take a shower before she... I don't think we should be surprised how Ernie can't remember the woman's name, other than her attractive features. But anyways, it seems like Ernie is in a bit of a situation. A manager of a soap factory, and yet he doesn't have a single bar of soap in his lavishing apartment. Other than a box of special soap he keeps in his living room, these bars were more like a token of Ernie's success, something that he never intended to use. Until now. Definitely don't want to spoil the night with whatever her name is. So while Ernie gets himself ready for an exciting, well-deserved evening, let me take you back to the bottom of Ernie's ladder, the day when Ernie found himself with a job at the Hudson Soap Factory. Before this job, Ernie was the kind of man who had his own struggles finding work, which explains why he took this job out of desperation. The first few weeks were the toughest. Ernie never expected that loading and unloading barrels of scrap meat that had been collected from butcher shops and restaurants would have him go into a series of convulsions because of the powerful stench. Oh yes, Ernie hated the job, and most of all, his manager, Benny Anderson. God, how much Ernie despised that man. Him and his crack whip methods of getting the job done. Getting a thrill when seeing Ernie throwing up because of how he couldn't handle it. But eventually Ernie toughed it out, and a few months later he found himself being promoted to the vending vats. And even though Ernie started finding himself enjoying this job, Ernie was still struggling with Benny because of how he didn't agree with Ernie's lack of respect for his supervisor. Yeah, Ernie may have found himself climbing that ladder, but that doesn't make him Benny's drinking buddy when they're on the clock. In Benny's experience, having that kind of attitude usually results with slacking behavior, which is something that Benny cannot tolerate. Now, I bet many of you are curious as to what goes on within the Hudson Soap Factory. Those rending vats that looks like huge cauldrons with water, that's where the scrap meat is placed. After the vats are lit and the water starts to boil, that's when the fat and oils from the meat starts rising to the surface, along with the bubbling liquid. Then the water on the bottom is drained, and the remaining fats and oils are saponified. The raw soap is then perfumed and ran into the rollers where they get solidified, flaked off, and pressed into familiar soap cakes. And yes, it's a lot of hard work to run this operation, which explains Benny's strict behavior and constant demands for Ernie to keep focus on the task and work harder. Benny's strict demands, high expectations, and making sure that the job gets done while everyone is on the clock, these are the reasons why Hudson Soap is the top-selling product in stores. Ernie, however, well, even though he quickly made an impression on the owner of the company because of his positive attitude, hard work, and enthusiasm to grow within the business, like every other boss, it's too bad that Mr. Hudson fails to see Ernie's slacking behavior that has constantly put him at odds with Benny. Taking smoke breaks whenever he wanted, 30-minute lunches that stretched to an hour, Ernie's lack of respect for chain of command, and this habit of cutting corners, like doing a job halfway. Oh yes, Benny despised Ernie because of his slacking behavior, especially when Ernie succeeded on advancing himself to assistant manager. Now that Ernie was high on that ladder, there was only one obstacle that stood in Ernie's way from reaching to the top: Benny Anderson. Because of Benny, assistant manager was as high as Ernie could go. Even though Ernie tried convincing Mr. Hudson to find a way to make him manager, unfortunately, the only way Ernie could go any higher was if Benny Anderson were to retire or leave the company. Yes, Mr. Hudson believes that Ernie would be suitable for the position. But Benny has been manager of the Hudson Soap Factory for years, and it won't be until years later till he retires, and it's highly doubtful that Benny Anderson will leave. And Mr. Hudson was right. Ernie knows damn well that there's no way Benny will be leaving anytime soon. Unless something were to happen. Like, what if Benny were to just disappear? I can say that the thoughts of a conniving man who dreams of reaping the spoils of his success by getting his hands dirty, is truly a horror. A sadistic plan of making sure to catch Benny on his late nights at work when it was time for inventory. The perfect opportunity to kill Benny, and to have him disappear by throwing Benny's body into the rending vats. That's right, the remains of Benny Anderson, meat that had turned into several bars of soap, every bar scented, wrapped, and stored within a box, and displayed within Ernie's living room as a sadistic token of Ernie's success. Now you see why Ernie never intended to use these bars of soap, but with Virginia coming over, imagine that. Now he remembers her name. Not that it's important or anything. But sure, it's kind of morbid using one of these bars of soap. But due to the circumstances, hopefully you can understand why Ernie is showering with one of Hudson's special soap bars. Limited edition. Soap is soap, much like meat is meat. I bet Ernie is spending his time in the shower pondering over this crazy idea now that he's manager. A little side job that may give him some extra cash. Seeing how he can't tell the difference between soap that is made from meat scraps and the soap that is made from Benny Anderson. You know how much money you can make for disposing bodies? A little underground business? Even when he's already at the top, Ernie still has the intent of climbing farther. But what Ernie does not know is that there's an unseen horror just waiting to push him off that ladder and watch him break. Beginning with a sudden itch within Ernie's eyes. At first, it felt like soap had gotten his eyes, but the irritation quickly turned into a stinging pain, like it was acid burning his eyes. Dropping the bar of soap and desperately reaching for the faucet, blind and fumbling in the shower, unaware that he had just turned off the cold water, unable to find and turn off the hot water faucet because of the soapy suds burning his eyes, with scalding hot water striking against his naked flesh. Ernie gave up on the faucet and tried reaching for the door handle to the shower stall, until something slimy skidded from beneath his feet, causing Ernie to fall and break his right leg. Now pathetically sprawled on the smooth floor of his new shower stall, holding his distorted and twisted leg, feeling the bone protruding from the flesh, blind and helpless to the scalding hot water destroying his flesh. The torture, the pain that was becoming too much for Ernie. You could even hear the pain in his voice when he tried screaming for help, trying to spend his final moments begging God for mercy upon his pathetic soul, and not knowing that his final effort of trying to reach for that shower door, Ernie was just a few inches away from being free from this unremitting horror. By the time the water began filling up the shower, because of the bar of soap clogging the drain, that was when Ernie knew how he was going to die. He's going to drown. And even though Ernie tried making the efforts of saving himself by keeping his head above the hot water because of his broken leg, Ernie kept collapsing. And well, it took some time before Ernie gave up. And he drowned. Now that, my friends, is what I call a clean death. Especially for a guy who isn't afraid to get his hands dirty. I guess poor Ernie is going to be late for his date. Too bad for Virginia. This is what happens when a murderer decides to come clean. But you know something, my friends? Yeah, I got this new job, but I can't help but share this new Patreon idea of mine. I'm thinking about giving these supporters of mine something far much better than sexy bathwater. How about Horror Show Mickey bath soap, made with real Horror Show Mickey. Warning: using Horror Show Mickey bath soap, you may experience bleeding, diarrhea, nausea, headaches, birth defects, kidney failure, erectile dysfunction, loss of appetite, cannibalism, psychotic episodes, delusions, and continuous headbanging. But hey, at least you get to shower with your best friend Mickey. At your own risk, of course. Until next time, my friends, thank you for watching the show, The Horror Show. Whew. Quite the weather we're having. Hot. You know, out of all the stories I shared, I wonder which one made you the most uncomfortable. I mean, we have stories of people turning into snails before being cannibalized. Women drilling into people for that sweet blood. One guy sliding down a razor-sharp pole. Stick bugs being a little too friendly with the ladies. We even had one guy who didn't seem to make it to the other side. He kinda got stuck in a bad situation after his wife chopped him up into fine little pieces. That one's my favorite. For today's story, I think we're gonna see something different. Something that should make us cringe with discomfort when enjoying that hot summer sun, and see what happens when death decides to play sadist. Introduction: Earl Diggs, who just robbed a bank, and now spending his summer fun going 130 miles per hour on a long stretch of highway through some desert, being chased down by some enthusiastic state trooper on a motorcycle who's just itching to bring in Diggs, alive or dead. Our boy Diggs had not only stolen about $30,000 in cash, but killed a guard with a knife when he tried stopping Diggs. Oh yes, Diggs is on a mission. Beyond the desert, my friends, awaits the promised land. A paradise with easy living, fine women, fancy clothing and all. Only problem is this state trooper who's been on his tail for a good 20 minutes now. Seeing how Diggs already wiped off one miserable cop from this world, this state trooper shouldn't be too hard for Diggs to take care of. And keeping his eye on the trooper, waiting for the right moment. That was when Diggs slammed on his brakes, but instead of hearing the sounds of metal against metal, flesh being splattered against his car, Diggs' car ended up swerving instead, causing the vehicle to spin over and over, the steering wheel crushing against his chest. His body smacked against the roof before Diggs felt his head smashing through the glass, before everything went black. That was all Diggs could remember when slowly regaining consciousness, being tossed around inside the car. Not sure if he was thrown out, or the state trooper pulled his body from the wrecked car. Finding himself laying right next to the bike, feeling a tug on his right arm, the iron metal on his wrist. He was handcuffed to the state trooper. Why the hell was he handcuffed to the state trooper? Took a few minutes for Diggs to make out what the trooper was saying into the mic. Obviously, the trooper was calling for reinforcements. Thinking that Diggs was still out cold, he did hear that all the money had burned in the crash, also mentioning something about a master cuff key, and how he managed to save Diggs before the car caught on fire, which was a bad mistake. And when Diggs found the opportunity, that was when he attacked the state trooper, overpowered him, his hands wrapped tightly around the trooper's neck. All this could have been avoided if he hadn't gotten his way. Another cop that could have went home to his wife and kids if he were to just leave it alone. But instead, this state trooper had to play hero, and now here he is, his ignorant life fading away. After the trooper was taken care of, Diggs had about guessing 16 to 20 minutes to get out of the area before reinforcements came. Should give him plenty of time to make it past the rocks and make a clean getaway. Except, it's not going to be that easy for Diggs. After wasting 5 minutes already, frantically looking for the key to the handcuffs, that was when he remembered the state trooper asking for the master cuff key. With time running out and left with no other choice, obviously using a motorcycle wasn't an option, seeing how Diggs was handcuffed to a dead body. Diggs picked up the dead trooper and began running into the Badlands. Because of the body weighing him down, Diggs' legs began to feel like rubber. His throat felt like it was wrapped by a steel band. His heart feeling like it wanted to pound out of his chest. His body soaked with perspiration because of the blazing heat. Regardless of Diggs' efforts, it wasn't enough to get a lead. He had to get rid of this dead body. And when hearing the sounds of tires screeching on the road, this was it. The state troopers are now here. But when looking over a rock, Diggs was relieved when realizing that it wasn't the state troopers. It was a couple of cars that stopped to investigate the crash. The break that Diggs needed to catch his breath and make a clean getaway. 'Cause 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 'c deep inside the real rock country of America. There's no way the troopers will be able to find Diggs this far in the desert. Not even the bloodhounds would be able to catch his scent. Ladies and gentlemen, Earl Diggs had just escaped the hands of justice. But I don't know. I wouldn't consider Diggs lucky. Because you see, he kind of got himself in a situation here. His attempt to enter the paradise with $30,000 resulted with all the money lost in the fire, finding himself handcuffed to a state trooper that's still on his tail. And there's nothing around the area to cut off the dead trooper's hand. When the trooper pulled Diggs from the fire, he must have searched Diggs' pockets and removed the knife. There's no way Diggs is going to go back looking for it. The following morning, our lucky boy realized that he was in a situation far worse than some dingy prison, being passed around for some smokes. It was already 108 degrees. The heat was taking a heavy toll on Diggs' body, his eyes stinging because of the thick drops of sweat filling his eyes, then touching his lips. That strong, salty taste hitting his tongue, torturing Diggs with his painful craving for water. My God, he's never had a craving for water like this. The internal pain was so bad that he would even spend $30,000 for a glass of ice-cold water. Or something to free himself from this goddamn body. Already the trooper began reaching rigor mortis. It won't be long until the body starts reeking with death. But hope came in the form of a shiny glimmer that struck the corner of Diggs' eyes. A piece of metal on the trooper's body. Yes, the state trooper's badge. With that, our lucky boy can cut himself free. But when Diggs began cutting into the state trooper's arm, a badge slicing into the white flesh, showing the red and slimy muscles and tendons. It was something that made Diggs feel sick, squeamish. A ruthless cop killer that can't stand a little blood. And because of that was why Diggs accidentally dropped the badge and lost his only chance to free himself from the body when the badge fell into a crevice. It must have been over 110 degrees. Because of the heat and being handcuffed to a dead carcass, reeking with the foul stench of death, riddled with flies laying their eggs inside the body, maggots eating away the rotting flesh, Diggs lost his ability to stay focused, running, falling, and then getting back up to run again before falling on his face. Going in circles, the man was disorientated. Diggs' wrist was now bleeding, throbbing with stinging pain because of the handcuffs tearing open his flesh, exposing the muscles and tendons. Diggs' lips were now dry. There were even no tears when Diggs would have moments where he wanted to weep. Just a pitiful display of a man groaning and grunting. Everything was spinning. It was no longer about the promised land. It was every shred of Diggs' body trying to find any means of survival to free himself from this unbearable torment. Then there came the shadows that brought the small moments of relief from the violent rays of the sun. Carrion vultures. A sign of death. A horror that began hovering around Diggs and the carcass. Every now and then Diggs could hear them singing their deathly chorus. Carrion vultures, stalking their next meal. When nightfall came, resting his body from the heat, the fatigue and pain because of how he's now going with 2 days without a drop of water, Diggs was now at the point where taking an advantage of finding rest would result with him waking up to a swarm of carrion vultures feasting on the trooper's corpse. Yes, my friends, death was standing over Diggs. That's the horror of these birds, how they can be patient and greedy, just waiting for the right moment to scavenge as much tasty rotting flesh as they can, because they know when you're going to die. They can even wait for days, waiting for you to fall. This is why Diggs refuses to sleep. He might wake up to a swarm of carrion vultures tearing into his flesh. Diggs is now walking into day 3, still clinging onto this foolish idea that his efforts for survival will come in the form of a cabin, a miner's cave, anything that would give him that small hope of survival. But day 3, my friends, had only brought more heat, more pain, and a terrible stench from a partially eaten carcass that was handcuffed to him. When nightfall came, death was now drawing closer. Every shred of hope that Diggs had within him was now gone. There was nothing left in Diggs, just a shell of his former self stumbling in the middle of nowhere America. The following morning, Diggs accepted the reality of his situation. He can't find his way out of this desert. He can't find any water. He can't find a way to free himself from this rotting carcass. Fact is, Earl Diggs is going to die. So the question on Diggs' mind, how is he going to kill himself in this desert? Day 4. Diggs gave up and decided to lay on the ground, screaming and begging for the vultures to come down and set him free, begging for death to grant him that comforting touch, to relieve him from this unbearable nightmare and carry him into the promised land. And after hours of baking in the sun, Diggs decided to play dead, to lay still in hopes of convincing the carrion vultures above that he was now a carcass. Because of the heat, the small moments of shade from the vultures circling his body, Diggs kept going in and out of consciousness. When hearing the sounds of wings fluttering, Diggs kept his eyes closed, hoping to not scare away the vultures. But there was something different. The pain was now different. It's like he couldn't feel anything other than a few jerks and tugs on his lower body. And when opening his eyes, Diggs could see the swarm of vultures tearing into the trooper's rotting carcass. But I guess death didn't want Diggs to miss out on the joyful experience of a carrion death, having the opportunity to wake up to an unremitting horror when seeing the vultures swarming his body. Oh yes, Diggs didn't feel any nausea, no revulsion, no pain. He was still alive, except he could not move, nor could he scream. Can you imagine? Your final moments in this cold, cruel, unforgiving world is watching yourself being eaten alive underneath the unforgiving sun. Funny how the vulture didn't eat out both eyes. Didn't want Diggs to miss out on the horror show. Death standing over your shoulder, looking down on you like a sadist before taking your miserable soul to the other side. Now, I don't know when Diggs finally passed on. For me, I think he made it till the evening. Ah, what the hell. Seeing how Diggs is so lucky, I'm gonna say he made it all the way till the next morning. But I'll leave that to your twisted imagination. Ladies and gentlemen, my friends, today we're going fishing. I bet a handful of you have never fished, nor fancied the idea of spending your day by the ocean, waiting patiently for that snag, teasing yourself with the idea that your efforts will be rewarded with a fine catch, something to gloat about when challenging your luck, only to find that all the time you wasted, the effort you spent, was all for nothing. But if you're like Maxwell Larkin, a man who's devoted his years and passion towards fishing, you may see it as something more than a hobby. For Maxwell, it's a way of life, an inner sense of fulfillment when crafting your skills to where you can easily capture the biggest catch within the sea, to test your luck and take on a struggling challenge. How we humans love a good sport. Now, even though there are some people who frown upon fishing, much like Maxwell's good friend Steve, who was dragged into this trip, you see, Steve doesn't see fishing as a sport nor a hobby. He finds it immoral, an act that defines cruelty towards living animals. Personally, I see no problem at fishing. However, where I do see the problem is why Steve decided to spend his Saturday morning by joining Maxwell on one of his fishing trips to the shore. You see, Maxwell is the kind of guy who believes that fishing is something that anybody can enjoy, and completely disregarding Steve's opinions. It was hard at first, but managing to talk Steve into joining him, Maxwell was hoping that Steve would see through this ridiculous belief that fish feel pain, that they suffer after being caught, and find himself being converted into someone who will enjoy fishing. Basically, this is an example of someone trying to put their opinions over someone else. I mean, not only do we get to join Steve as Maxwell shows us the fundamentals, the tips and tricks to be an experienced fisherman. Spoilers, you're not going to learn anything about fishing. But learn a valuable lesson if you decide to go fishing, or when using your common senses when walking on the beach. Now with Maxwell not hesitating the golden opportunity to show us the specific type of fishing called surf casting, using equipment like the sand spike to hold the fishing rod upright and to make sure that sand doesn't get into the reel. And this bizarre thing shaped like a small fish is a striped bass plug, the thing that will haul in the bass once it takes a bite. Now, hauling the fish in ain't as easy as it looks. You see, the bass is going to be putting up one hell of a fight, and you just can't haul him in, or you're going to end up causing the line to snap. You gotta wear him down, slowly bring him in once there's no fight left, and then you got him. Sometimes the fight may take up to an hour. And as Maxwell swung the rod over his shoulder, showing Steve how to throw the plug over the incoming breakers, now once the plug is in the water, the trick is to slowly reel it back, making it look like a live fish because of how it weaves and bobs. And immediately, that was when Maxwell got a strike. Oh yes, he definitely got one, watching the bass jumping out of the water. And after 40 long minutes of fighting and struggling between Maxwell and the bass, that was when Maxwell hauled in the fish, a 30-pound bass, a triumphant success. Stephen, however, still felt differently about fishing. He just couldn't see how someone would call this a sport. For months, Maxwell had been telling Steve that he was over-exaggerating, that he was being a softy, and that he should at least join him on one of his trips and give it a try. But watching Maxwell fight that fish, seeing that look on his friend's face, and stepping on the fish's head, and now wanting to use the knife that was in his tackling box, for Steve, this fishing was more cruel, barbaric, and sadistic than he thought. There was just no way he wanted any part of it. Which is why Steve decided to take the car and leave, come back a couple hours later to pick up Maxwell, accidentally knocking over Maxwell's tackle box along the way. So Stephen didn't have the stomach for fishing. As I said, I don't think there's nothing wrong with fishing, nor Stephen's opinions. You see, my friends, in this world we live in, there are people who have opinions that are different. And not only is there a line that separates these opinions, but when two people have thoughts that contradict each other, it's best to make sure that line is respected. And well, that is where I feel Maxwell was wrong when crossing that line by trying to persuade his friend onto his side. Maybe if Maxwell were to have a little bit of respect for Stephen's opinions, our story may have turned out differently. Aside from that, what I am more interested in is if Stephen is right. Do fish feel any pain? An interesting curiosity. Even though Maxwell has 2 hours before his friend comes back, already an hour and a half later, I guess there was no luck on finding another fine catch. Not as lucky as the first one, but feeling hungry and noticing that it was lunchtime already. Unfortunately, Maxwell just remembered that he left his sandwich in the car. After a brief moment of throwing a fit, Maxwell just realizing how his luck is turning sour. Luck was about to be on his side again when noticing a candy bar on the ground. Must have fallen out of the tackle box when Steve accidentally knocked it over. And picking up the candy bar, unwrapping it, taking a hungry bite. The first second of tasting that sweet chocolate. That was when there was a sharp pain in Maxwell's mouth, a sudden yank that was pulling his jaw, something within the candy bar that pierced through Maxwell's cheek and tongue, pulling him into the ocean. And after 20 minutes of clawing and fighting and screaming, hoping somebody would hear his cries, trying everything he can from being dragged into the water. Now, I've heard somewhere that fish don't feel pain. Not like humans do. I think that's a curiosity that's best left for you. But what I do know is that Maxwell has spent over 30 minutes of excruciating pain, and his efforts to save himself is diminishing. Maybe if he had a little bit more fight in him, his friend Steven may have saved him from being dragged into the water. And when Steve did come back, finding Maxwell missing, not knowing what happened until he noticed something moving in the water, it was Maxwell, and that was the last time anybody had seen Maxwell alive. Now, I don't know what happened to our fisherman. I'll leave that to your wild imagination. But here's a valuable lesson, my friends. If you ever find yourself on the beach, and you see a candy bar, don't eat it. You just might get hooked. A new year upon us. A new chapter for this horror show, and do I have such wonderful sights to show you, new flavors of horror that I'm just so excited to share. For today, I think I want to share a sample of what's yet to come, more like giving a lesson in human cruelty and rage. Admit it, some of you enjoy seeing the suffering on my show. Scoundrels, wrongdoers, and society scum falling victim to the creativity of horrors, and even though I had taken a fancy to what is called revenge horror, giving that sweet satisfaction of morbid justice being inflicted upon those who rightfully deserve the unremitting horror, I understand that some people love the kind of terror that preys upon those who are innocent. Tales of horror that are the reflection of a world that is unfair and cruel. Yes, we have those on here too, and more to come. We, as in myself and all those other personalities running wild through my head. But for today, we are about to venture into the safari jungle and join a man who's going to give us a lesson in sadism and human cruelty. Introduction: John Carver. Once a man of wealth and great respect, he had it all. A thriving business, a trophy wife, and an ivory tower to reap his spoils. Until one day John Carver lost that life of luxury and selfish happiness. His business partner who milked him dry, resulting with his business going bust. Whose wife cheated on him for another man, resulting with his marriage coming to an end. His lawyer that did nothing to regain all that which was unfairly taken away from him, resulting with John Carver having nothing left in his name but a huge lawyer fee to pay off. And just like that, John Carver was a nobody. All that hard work, and had nothing to show for it. And now, here he is, spending his remaining funds on one of his safari hunts, trying to escape from that world of misery and relish the remaining joys of the man he once was. Yes, John Carver is a man of sport, a man who enjoyed his hunting trips when playing the deadliest game, except on this trip, his final trip. For obvious reasons, John Carver is a different man, a man who isn't here for sport, filled with rage, a desire to inflict cruelty upon those who had wronged him. And well, when the moment came when finding a cheetah being ensnared within one of his traps, the inner excitement of knowing what's yet to come, a grand experience that John had been waiting for this whole time, and pulling out a handful of steel-tipped darts and weighted knives from his leather bag. that sinister glee on John's face, showing that this cheetah was not going to have a quick death. For John, this was an opportunity to indulge a sickening appetite by inflicting suffering and torture. Why not relish the moment on giving this cheetah a long and painful death? The thrill of hearing the cheetah's agonizing screams as each dart and knife penetrated its flesh. Such beautiful music in the air. It was like hearing his partner screaming, these knives going into his wife's flesh. The surge running through John's body when seeing his lawyer's blood being spilt onto the ground. His father's pain. I bet some of us are uncomfortable when seeing the performance of human cruelty in its full authenticity. I wonder what goes through one's mind when seeing this man torturing an innocent animal. The satisfaction of man inflicting his wildest fantasy that is shunned in today's society. What would one think when knowing that this man has a desperate need to capture an ape alive? Knowing that the reasons are because out of the entire animal kingdom, it is the ape that strongly resembles man. Seeing this act of cruelty in its most artistic form, I wonder, as a viewer, if there's a sense of inner rage. I'm willing to bet that there are members of my audience right now who have a desire to see this man enjoy a suffering death. You know, I wonder what that makes us. Like I said, my friends, today's lesson is about human cruelty. Like trying to figure out why John is pouring kerosene into the found anthills and dancing to the sounds of ants popping to the blazing fire. The reckless and impulsive results of sadism. Or maybe it's the beauty of seeing something that resembles the world burning by his own hand. But when overhearing the sounds of an ape falling into one of his pit traps, imagine the morbid excitement within John, the anticipation and knowing that he's about to receive his just reward. His rightful vengeance upon all those who had wronged him. And there it was, a live ape, trapped and helpless within one of his pits. And pulling out his leather bag, laying out and displaying these instruments of torture before the ape, the very tools for a slow and agonizing death. Oh yes, John was relishing the terrified look within the ape's eyes. These were the eyes of his backstabbing business partner, his filthy, cheating wife, his blood-sucking lawyer, and his drunken father. John savored every flash of pain within those eyes as he hacked, drilled, crunched bone, and cut into the ape, until the poor animal had finally died an hour later. The experience was unlike anything John had felt. Exhilaration running through his body. An intense bliss when seeing the remains of the lifeless ape. The taste of vengeance was so exquisite, such a high, that John Carver had developed a craving for more. As days followed, several more animals have fallen to John's appetite, growing more creative with the skills of torture when using flaming spears and axes. How he relished the suffering from every animal that had fallen to one of his traps. But no other animal had given John greater satisfaction than the man-like ape, which explains why he dug several other pits around his campsite. But John was about to find himself facing the consequences of his campaign of cruelty when he had accidentally fallen into one of his own traps when returning back to camp. With the spikes in the ground confining his body, John's screams for help was hopeless. Miles away from civilization, and the only ones that could hear his desperate pleas were the cousins of those he had tortured. The lion, the hyena, the cheetah, and even the ape, all gathering around John. There was no fear when seeing these animals before him. John knew that he was going to die. Rather than questioning the unusual behavior of these animals as they surrounded him as mere spectators, John was fully convinced and even committed to the idea that he was going to receive an instant death. I guess John Carver finally had a moment to reflect upon his own actions, his horrid deeds, and the fact that he has nothing left to live for. How he lived his life with greed and selfishness until it had stopped going his way, and as a result, he chose to be a monster with an appetite for torture and sadism. John Carver realizing that a man like him does not belong in this world. And soon, these animals are going to bring an end to John's miserable life. It's for the best. The world no longer needs a monster like John Carver. I think it's funny how John Carver underestimated his situation. The humor in knowing how John is convinced that his own death will be quick, not knowing that these animals surrounding John are not here to kill him, but to indulge in their own form of sadism. They want justice, in a way that will make John Carver a horror story for those who decide to follow his path of darkness. You see, John should know that the combinations of cruelty and revenge doesn't allow you to choose your own death. And hearing the faint sounds of rustling growing more louder by the second, I think John is about to experience the same joys of horror that he inflicted on all those animals when seeing the wave of ants coming for his trapped and helpless body. Death by ants. Not a pleasant experience. Did you know that ants were used as a technique for torture and even executions? Imagine the fun in that. Your skin tickling at the thought of ants dancing on your flesh. Now, if these were stinging ants feasting on John, then death would be rather quick. Except these are not stinging ants. No, these are the kind of ants that bring intense pain, rewarding the animals and ourselves with a beautiful horror show. And the animals, witnessing the ants swarming John's exposed head, frantically running in and out of his nose, his ears, tearing into the soft, moisty eyes. John's insides slowly being filled with ants, desperately trying to push deeper into his body. And the music of John's painful screams slowly being muffled and choked because of the ants that will fill his throat, desperate to feast upon the innards. It must have been almost 2 hours before John's cries had turned into small, faint whimpers. The immense pain causing his mind to dissociate himself from reality, wasting his final moments in pain and suffering. The animals still witnessing the black mass of frenzied ants that covered John's head, watching those moments of slight twitching, a few signs of life before this sadistic monster had finally succumbed to the pain and died horribly. You know, I bet nobody is going to know the story of the skull on the ground in the middle of the jungle. Nature's own way of giving a warning to those who prefer using animals to feed into their appetite for sadism. Poor John, a man of success, who had hit hard times and fallen into the shameful world of sadism, only to suffer a long and agonizing death, and be nothing more but a symbol of Mother Nature's cruelty.